Hello and welcome to the Arts Our Education Talk It Up podcast, where I talk to national, state, and local leaders who are working to make arts education part of every student's life. I'm Jim Palmerity, your host. This podcast series is Meet NCAS, in which I talk to representatives of the member organizations, the National Coalition for Arts Standards, that's ARE Sponsoring Network. NCAS is a collaboration of 8 national arts and arts education organizations who actively work to ensure quality standards-based arts education opportunities for every student. So over the past several months, I have been talking to their leadership about the organizations themselves and their perspective about the foundational focus of NCAS, that is K-12 arts education standards and their importance to their members and to the field. So today we are talking to Scott Sheehan, current president of the National Association for Music Education, otherwise known as NAfME. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, Jim. Thanks. It's so great to be here.
And thank you so much for being here. As we were just talking a minute ago, it's a busy time of the year as everybody's trying to wrap up final projects in their various arts discipline. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And there you are. And here I am. And let's get started with our conversation. Let's talk about NAfME. Tell me a bit about NAfME, the organization's history, its mission, and its goals. To you, Scott.
Sure. Thank you so much. Well, the first thing I think I want to talk to you about is the fact that the name has changed, right? So NAfME, what is now the National Association for Music Education, actually was founded in 1907. So we are 116 years old, and it was founded as the Music Supervisors National Conference. So our what we like to refer as the mother of MENC was Francis Clark. Yeah, Francis was the first to preside over that meeting in 1907 in Keokuk, Iowa. And later, as time went on, the name changed again in 1934, and it became known as the Music Educators National Conference. And for decades, people referred to it as MENC. And then we had another little name change in 1998, where it became MENC, the National Association for Music Education. And then finally, in 2011, we dropped the name of MENC, and we're just now the National Association for Music Education. So for over a decade, we've been NAfME. And I think that that's one thing that's a little interesting. But in terms of the history, NAfME, MENC has been really trying to be at the forefront of music education, both from its beginnings as supervisors and so on, and then moving forward into what we now call a family of associations with over 52 different independent state.
Wow.
Yeah, independent state associations. And we actually now are, speaking of 52, we have 52,000 members, which is wonderful to see that growing again post-pandemic, because that certainly affected us a lot in that way. So, when you look through the history, and I would just encourage people to go to the NAfME website to check out some of the history, because there have been many pivotal moments throughout the history of our profession as music education that have happened that NAfME was at the forefront. We were there as changes were happening both in society as well as in education at large, not just necessarily music education, to make sure that that representation was there and that music had a voice. And I think another important piece to know for listeners is that NAfME, many people see NAfME as an advocacy association where we are bringing forward the mission of music education for all children. And that has been something that, as we have most recently gone through some changes as an association, we just released a new strategic plan. And so when you're asking a little bit about, where are we headed, what are we doing, I think this would be the most relevant for listeners now, is to hear a little bit about our new strategic plan that was just released in the fall. So this new plan was a 2-year process. The immediate past president, Dr. Mackie Spradley, led us through truly a deep dive and soul search into who we are and why we exist. Previous to the pandemic, about 4 years ago, we had commissioned a private company called Cook Ross to do a study on unconscious bias within our association. You might recall that. All this can be found on the website too. And they pointed to different areas of things that we should consider. And so Mackie, through her leadership, wanted our new strategic plan to be built from the ground up. It would be built from what the members felt were important. And again, it's asked those deep questions. What's our why? Why do we exist? And so from all of these town halls, meetings, time with our leaders, time with all the state leaders and so on, we've come out with some really, really great information. We are advocates. We are first and foremost advocates for learners. We are advocates for students. We are a collective voice and a community of practice. We are a creative society of musicians. It's music that brings us together, which is, why we're connected with all of you. And then, of course, we are researchers and scholars and pre-service music educators and practitioners. And so as we went through this to really try to look at all of the different branches and arms that create NAfME, because we have societies, the Society for Research in Music Education, the Society for Music Teacher Education, SRME and SMTE. And then we have many councils and all sorts of committees and arms and branches in the states that make NAfME. As we went through this 2-year process, we wanted to make sure everybody that had a horse in the race, so to say, were part of this. And so our new mission now as NAfME is to be a collaborative community that supports music educators and advocates for equitable access to music education.
Scott, I've always been really impressed with NAfME's very coordinated and focused advocacy efforts, both in the national, state, and local levels. So what you're telling me seems to be the next generation of that work about inclusivity. We all know we are in sort of a post-pandemic period, and also a new awareness to acknowledge everybody who has, as you say, a sort of horse in the race, and that is, and NAfME, I'm the theater guy, but still, you have so many different constituents doing so many different things, and of course, music is the most predominant form of arts education in our schools, and rightly so. So that's a great overview. So to move into another phase of our conversation, which is what the National Coalition for Art Standards is about, is those art standards. I'm sure you can talk about the old art standards. We have new art standards and where we're going. So how have music standards played a role in K-12 arts education? Why are they important?
That's a great question. And I think I have two kind of areas I want to talk about. Number one is, why have standards? Well, we know that this is a very vast country, and the differences in school districts. I'm the first practicing public school K-12 music teacher to be the president of NAfME.
And congratulations for that.
Well, thank you. And but I say that proudly because, in many ways I represent, the majority of our members. And when you think about how do standards become implemented in schools, the first thing we have to say is not all schools are the same. And every school has different opportunities, different community, different type of support, different type of culture, that every school is different in that way. What standards do and why we should have standards is they help us to give those benchmarks that every child, all students, and I know that even that word sometimes becomes a little, contentious when we say all students, because we know there's about 4 million students without music education in the country. But nonetheless, standards are really there to give us that level set of that all students are able to create, perform, respond, and connect through the arts, and in our case, through music, and that they serve as those benchmarks and guides that whether you're in Pennsylvania, like where I'm at, or you're in the middle of Nebraska, or you're in Maine or Hawaii, you are still able to work towards that growth and achievement towards those basic benchmark standards. The other thing I think about standards is that when the first set of standards came out in '94, that took a while till they caught on, and
yes,
and we think about this, that the new standards are actually almost 9 years old. And so they're
Yeah.
not so new anymore. However, the crazy thing in my mind is it's really the application, the use, the implementation, the adaptation of the standards themselves. And so I would say it takes about a decade until you really start to see the standards, take on a life of their own and become embedded. And it gives time for states, because education is state controlled, and in some cases local control. It gives states time to adapt, adopt, take a look at the standards. And so I felt like it was about 20 years, right, from the 19 standards to the 2014 standards, and now here we are 8 years into the 2014 standards, and I think we're starting to see the time now for people to really look at the implementation. What does this mean for me in my music classroom? If you're a collegiate and you're a college student, what does this mean for me when I get my job? If you're a professor and you're a music teacher, educator, you're seeing how do I embrace this? And I am seeing this as the national president across the country, that I do see the 2014 standards being implemented and being, what's the word I'm trying to say? Kind of lifted up. I do see
Elevated.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
elevated. That's
Yes.
elevated.
Yes.
And so, I think that they're very important. And I think it takes time. I really see it takes time to really get to the individual classrooms and to the students.
So, you really said a couple of really important things that made me want to ask a secondary question, which is that partly what standards do is they articulate skills and knowledge that are definable and therefore accessible, and that they ought to be taught by skilled professionals who are trained to do so, because you mentioned students coming out of higher education programs. So yeah, what do you think the standards do to help define teaching professionals? Is that an important thing about the standard, what they do as an advocacy tool in a way for professionalism?
Sure, absolutely. Well, if you're an attorney, you're going to pass the bar test, right? You're going to do that. And if you're a doctor, you have your series of residencies and so on to become specialized. And I think for us as arts educators, the standards and knowledge of the standards and how to not only know what they are, in terms of the artistic processes and the process components and so on, but to really look at developing instruction and assessment that is tied to those standards. I think that's critical. And, I would say that it's important for licensure, for professionals to really take a look and have a working knowledge, not just what the standards are to be able to recite, create, perform, respond, connect, but also to see those standards as processes as they were intended to be, and then having a toolbox, if you will, to be able to implement each part of what those processes are.
Yeah, I think that it would seem now more than ever, the question is a little less daunting to all of arts educators about, these new standards that are not new anymore. Does this mean I have to reinvent my curriculum? How am I expected to align to these standards? But more than likely than not, you probably already are meeting so many of these standards. Would you say that was true for, let's move on a little bit here and talk about how those music standards have actually impacted your members in the field in general. How have they made a difference? We've talked a little bit about this, so go ahead.
Sure, thank you. And I think one of the things that I love about the new national standards, I said again, new, they're not so new, but one of the things I love about them, that it really is about process. They emphasize the doing, the making, the excuse me one second, we might want to edit that out, I don't know. Anyhow, they emphasize the doing, the making, the creating, their verbs, their actions. And
that's right.
I love the fact that they empower the music educator to empower their students, right? So it's all about students, and it's centering the students. And when you look really deeply at the standards themselves, the actual language in the standards, and you're looking at accomplished at the highest level for high school students, they're the ones driving their education. they're the ones that are taking ownership of their learning and their growth. And that's where I see people across the country, having success with the standards of kind of that flipped classroom mentality of let's put the students in charge of that learning and let them take off. And so I do see a lot there. Now, is the learning, are the standards being met in say, a classroom where it's not intentional, where we're not looking at the standards, but there's great music education going on and great learning and teaching and so on. Sure, I think it's there, but I would say to really get the richness and the fullness of what the intended piece of those standards are, you really need to take a look at them. Yes, I think it's there. If you're a great, say veteran teacher and you haven't really looked at them, I would really say look at them because there's so much there. The richness and fullness is there.
I go back to what you said about benchmarks and their use as a reflective tool.
Yeah.
For a teacher to consider, that every student can meet these standards. They're just not for some students, which, I love the beauty of that there is a place in these standards for every student, not just a select number.
Absolutely. And I remember when they first came out, people really pushed back because they said, wait a minute, there's no singing, there's no like playing of instruments. And it took a little while for folks to wrap their head around it. This is the processes of creating, of performing, and performance can be singing, it can be playing a trumpet, it could be an ensemble, it could be something completely different. It could be working with technology to create music, or something very unique and something that we music educators haven't even thought of yet. And so I love the flexibility, as you just mentioned, that there's so much there that literally every student can grow and learn through.
Do you think also that less emphasis, the product is great, we appreciate that, but there's an opportunity to communicate the value of the standards process to parents and other constituents to understand how their child actually grows over a period of time. So, I'm moving maybe into a discussion briefly of the value of standards and assessment. So,
yeah, I think so. And really, I think what's underneath all of what you just said is opportunity, right? That we want to provide opportunity for every child to experience the artistic processes as it's intended in the standards. And then along the way, we're taking note of that progress, of that growth through assessment. We're being able to have that data, have those benchmarks, and show that over time, whether you're sharing that with parents who are excited that their children are there, that can lead to retention, that can lead to exploration into another genre of performance, or another way of creating and composing, in our case in music, or a unique way of responding to music or connecting with other people. So I think that in that sense, that opportunity can be, very broad and vast for really anybody.
Yeah. So, Scott, here is a wrap-up question, sort of a bigger question, because there's so much discussion in our post-pandemic era of education about what is important for students. And we hear in the larger educationese language, well-rounded education. Under federal law, of course, the arts are part of a well-rounded education. Music in the arts, that's our language. So why is that so? Why is music education so important to a well-rounded education, along with all the other subjects, Jerry? As I told you, it was a big question.
It is a big question. And I think you almost have to look at it contextually. I mean, I can tell you why I think music education is important, for every child from my own perspective, but that's my lens, right?
Sure.
And I think what's so important is that every music educator, every arts educator knows that value for their students in their community, in their context. And so I think it's critical that we think of it that way. I do believe that the arts, music, engages the brain in ways that nothing else can. I do believe that music communicates and connects people across all time and cultures. I do believe that music and the arts is just basic to humanness, right? And being able to find our way in the world and express ourselves and learn how to interpret cultures that are different from ours and experiences that are different from ours. And so I can certainly share some of my basic overarching ideas, and NAfME has a beautiful belief statement about this in our new strategic plan. But I want to just emphasize that I think it's up to each of us as an arts educator or an arts advocate to look at the community, the culture, and the context of why you're advocating or why you want to see the arts and music elevated and lifted up as something that is prominent in the student's well-rounded education. I talk about this a lot. In some ways, it gets a little frustrating. You feel like you're throwing snowballs at an iceberg, because it's just really tough to get that message across. We know about brain research. We know just through anecdotal stories, the difference that music and the arts makes in the lives of children. Yet we still have to, kind of fight that fight and slug it out all the time. And so I hope that together, as we are working together with partner organizations like this group, I really hope that we can start to move that needle a little further.
Scott, I think that's a great closing. I love your passion for the series of belief statements, and I agree with you. Yeah, we are throwing snowballs at the iceberg, but let's keep doing it. And so I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank NAfME for the amazing work that they continue to do. And I know that they will continue to fight the good fight as we move forward. So at that, I'm going to do the awkward resharing of my screen to wrap up. If you want to learn more about the National Coalition for Arts Standards, please visit www.nationalartsstandard.org. And about NAfME, and I've spent plenty of time on the NAfME site. It is robust and everything from curriculum to advocacy tools to your strategic plan, which I have actually taken a look at, is available on the website at nafme.org. I would strongly urge our viewers to visit. And so, yes, our education is for everyone. So sign the ARE pledge indicating your support for arts education. Urge your school board to pass a resolution to fund arts education in the upcoming 2023 school years. And yes, you can donate to Arts Our Education to help share our message. So Scott, thank you so much again for being here, and good luck with the end of the school year to you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks again. Signing off.